All right. Welcome back, folks, from your long weekend. I hope you guys had a great one. I'm excited to be able to have our speaker today for our Life Beyond PhD series. I will be starting with a little bit of introductions in terms of administrative stuff, and we'll jump right into it. So just a heads up, if you don't know me, my name is Joanne. I'm the Program Director for Graduate Professional Success for STEM PhDs and postdocs, GPS STEM for short. We really focus in on helping prepare our STEM scientists at UCI for a variety of different careers within the STEM workforce and really help you guys to not only just become skilled scientists, but also polished professionals. And we really work to help create, identify, and support different types of approaches to help broaden your graduate and postdoctoral training. So today, the Life Beyond PhD series really showcases different STEM workforce careers and really celebrating the N of one journeys. And these are fireside types of chats, really intended to be informal, casual, and give you guys, the current PhDs and postdoc trainees, a chance to be able to explore various careers, identify those critical skills that you need in order to be successful now and in your training, but also further down the line when you are transitioning into your next role, wherever you are in your current program. And really give you a chance to connect with those in industries that you're interested in. Format-wise, administrative announcements here, wrapping that up. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. He will be sharing a little bit about his transition from PhD into where he is now, as well as sort of the obstacles, learned lessons, and advice that he has for current trainees, and then finally opening up to Q&A and individual networking if we have time. If it's a little bit quiet in the chat, I'm happy to fill in that gap with some questions that I've prepared previously. But without further ado, then, I'm happy to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Dr. Abid Najmati. He has earned his master's and PhD in material sciences at UC Irvine, and he has held various types of industry roles in the medical device field, particularly the project development engineer role, product technical lead, and he's now a senior engineer advancing the technology at Dexcom, looking at continuous glucose monitoring systems for diabetes management in San Diego, California. I'm actually going to keep it incredibly brief because Dr. Najmati is going to share a little bit more about where he's been, where he's going, and some advice there. So I will pass it to you now. Go ahead and share your screen if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Let me share my screen. Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming in. Thanks to Joanne for putting this thing together. I think this is pretty cool that we can get together with UCI folks. If there's anything I can help with, I would be happy to. I have a couple of slides I'm going to go over. I'm trying to share my screen right now. So my background, I grew up in Iran, north of Iran, close to Caspian Sea. That is a lake that people call sea because it's huge. It connects to Russia on north end, and at the south end, it's Iran. That's where the expensive caviar comes from. It's not too expensive in Iran, but when you import it to US, it becomes extremely expensive. The reason is that fish is an endangered species. So it's really weird if you want to bring any of that caviar to United States. They usually toss it in front of you. So I did my undergrad at the University of Tehran. You can see the symbol here. The background was material science, but I really wanted to work on biomedical engineering related research. Fortunately or unfortunately, in material science department, there was only a few projects that were somewhat related to biomedical engineering, and I chose the best one that I could. It was working on biomedical titanium alloys that are being used in dental implants and hip implants and inside a body. So what I ended up doing was taking some of this alloy, doing some testing, mechanical testing, understanding the characteristics, the changes, and then publishing it in a paper. That paper really helped me. It was materials design. At the time, the impact factor was not that high up, but it has been going up, and I've been getting citations there. So that paper kind of helped me to get into UC Irvine because it was very difficult to get to a graduate program when you applied from Iran. For some reason, University of Tehran is not as recognized here as it is over there. Hopefully that will change in the future. So I got into material science department, which was joined with chemical engineering at the time. We were in the engineering tower. I think we are somewhere else at this point. Hopefully I'll get to find that new location and come visit soon. So I joined material science department, and I was looking for finding an opportunity to work on, again, medical engineering, biomedical engineering and materials that are used in developing medical devices. I think it was 1 year in when I was able to join a lab, Professor Lakey, that was starting a team, and we had him come from University of Alberta to UC Irvine at the time. It was very close to his arrival. And he was working on pancreatic islets that are used to basically create insulin and technologies related to reversing diabetes with using pancreatic islets. I joined his lab, and from there, I deviated into working in biomedical engineering lab, and I joined Professor Botvinnik's lab in biomedical engineering. These are the names I worked with during my material science PhD and master's, which was mostly biomedical engineering, to my understanding. So in brief, mostly during my master's, I worked on medical devices that can house pancreatic islets. These cells, if they are used correctly and implanted inside a host, can create insulin and help with diabetes. I have some backup slides on this right after this. And I also worked on non-invasive oxygen measurement technologies. These technologies become important because when the cells are implanted inside body, they often die because of lack of oxygen and other factors. So it was a really fun project. It started from around 2013 all the way to 2015, 2016. But at the time when we were working with Professor Botvinnik and Professor Lakey, there was an opportunity for me to join a startup that Professor Botvinnik had in his lab. And I started working on that from 2014, but around 2016, I was fully pivoted into that startup work, which was basically making multi-analyte biosensors. So utilizing the technology we had developed for measuring oxygen, now we were able to put together a sensor that can measure glucose, that can measure lactate, that can measure O2. This is pretty cool because you can measure glucose and help diabetic patients. You can measure lactate and go into hospital markets and help people that have sepsis. And you can measure O2 for a variety of purposes. So the topic of the work was making lots of traction, and that was majority of my thesis work. My thesis was finished in 2018, and the title was Tissue Engineering and Biosensing Towards Cure and Control of Diabetes. It resulted in one patent and a couple of publications, and it resulted in me working within a startup setting, which was really fun, and we finished clinical studies as well. So the experience was really rewarding. And around that time, and I think this may be an interesting topic of conversation for folks that are international students or come from other countries, or just like for curiosity in general, I use this academic achievements to basically create a case that says the skills that I have developed working on these technologies are helpful to United States, basically. There is a category of applying for permanent residency that if you can prove your abilities based on your publications, based on strong recommendation letters, based on patents, you can apply for a green card. So I did that application, I think in 2019, and early 2020, I think it was accepted. I may be off by a couple months, but it was around that time. Then I really wanted to know what goes into developing a biomedical product that can sell in millions. Because it's one thing to develop something within a lab and have really good papers. It can be a Nature paper with lots of publication. It's one other thing to develop something within a startup and get grants and expand your work. It's a completely different game if you want to have a product that you sell to millions of people. So that was why I was so curious to join a company that works on this. So it was a very easy transition for me because I was already working on developing biosensors, and I joined Dexcom. And currently I'm in Dexcom from 2020. And Dexcom is one of the two leading companies that are developing continuous glucose monitors. As of right now, 1.5 million people wear Dexcom sensors around the clock. So that's the population of San Diego. So they wear it every single day. The data of their glucose trends goes to cloud, goes to our algorithm team. Everything is analyzed. There's a really huge data set of how these people are doing. And this is just expanding. This is just a fraction of the market. And it really tied into my previous work. And recently, I've been thinking that I've done a good job. I mean, there's no end to understanding technical details, but I've had a good amount of time to work on it, plus 10 years at this point. Now I want to understand what goes into marketing, what goes into basically selling and creating money, what goes into commercialization, what are the other details of running a medical device company. So I've started pursuing my evening program MBA at UC San Diego. The classes are Tuesday and Thursday. It's a huge commitment in terms of both time and money because you have to pay some portion of the tuition. But I'm really looking forward to it. That will end in 2026. This is my whole background, where I started, where I am right now, living in San Diego. I have a couple of slides that go through what diabetes is, why these technologies are important. It will probably take me only a few minutes, so I'll just go through them quickly. I'm guessing some of the folks already know all of this stuff, so I'll just be very brief. So diabetes in general, both type 1 and type 2, is a disease characterized by elevated levels of blood glucose. So for some reason, your body cannot maintain a controlled level of glucose. In type 1 diabetes, you have an autoimmune disease. That's why it happens in kids as well. So your immune system comes and destroys those cells that are responsible for creating insulin. And for type 2, those cells become insensitive over time because of consumption of sugar and some other factors. So you don't necessarily inherit it, you develop that. The care and treatment, or you should probably reword that. The treatment that is used mostly is using blood to measure glucose. You can see it in this picture. And then you measure it with like a meter and you inject insulin based on your understanding of your body, what your body is going to do with the amount of insulin, what time of day it is, what kind of food you have. It's good, but it's imperfect because, well, we have so much technology right now. There are algorithms that can develop things. There are technologies that can make it hands-free, so you don't have to worry about it. If you have a child or if you are a 3-year-old, you probably cannot make this decision. If you have a 3-year-old, it's very difficult. So there are some alternative approaches. I started from here when I joined UC Irvine, and I'm very grateful because I think this is a pathway to actually curing diabetes. And it's not just, at this point, it's not just research. There are huge pharmaceutical companies working on this. So basically, the understanding is if you can have the cells that create insulin and you can hide them from the immune system, you can implant them inside a host and they will create insulin, and that host will not have diabetes problems anymore. And this drawing on top shows it. But the limitations are obviously the immune system is going to attack the cells that are not from that body, and they may die from lack of oxygen because there are not vasculatures around them. They were not developed within the body, and they will die. There are approaches. One of them is creating a medical device that is capable of transferring oxygen. That's shown to the right. So you basically insert the cells inside the device and you implant the device. There's another approach in which you wrap a protective polymer around the cells and then you insert them. Just a fun fact, a couple of years ago, Vertex Pharmaceuticals bought this startup for $1 billion in cash from Harvard. And now they're expanding fast. Last year, they also bought Viasite, which was another big startup in San Diego. And they're all merged at this point. A couple of different startups bought really put a lot of money. So this technology, when it's ready, is going to be life-changing. And this is something I'm doing right now. So in parallel to that technology, which is basically changing cells, you have technology that can measure glucose continuously. It's like a piece of wire or a piece of substrate that goes underneath the skin. You have polymers, you have enzymes, and you get a signal, and then you convert that signal to the glucose level. You can see a Dexcom package on top. This is G7. This is a packet for G7. A smartwatch that also connects with Dexcom. A phone that has a Dexcom app, so all the information is in cloud. You get continuous readings of glucose. There's very deep algorithm to predict what the glucose level is going to be. It can help people in terms of telling them how much insulin to insert manually, or it can also connect to an insulin pump through the cloud. And you can see pictures here. This person here has a G6 on the stomach, Omnipod on the leg. So they communicate with each other. If this person eats a lot of carbs, through the cloud, this Omnipod is going to know and it's going to inject insulin, and the level of glucose is going to come down. While it's coming down, the glucose sensor is going to read it and they're going to moderate it. So that's what I'm working on right now. Working on next generations of continuous glucose monitor to make it better, also measure other things. I think I can pause it here. This is where I am right now. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.
There is a question in the chat from Shin. Shin asks, do you have your patent granted by the time when you apply for the permanent citizenship? Also, how long does that take for your patent submission to be granted?
That's a really good question. No, the patent was submitted, I think, 2018, and it's not granted yet. It takes a while for patents to be granted. We filed our response to the examiner, and we're still waiting. So the patent status is pending. What was the rest of the question? Sorry, I've lost the chat somewhere. Let me stop sharing.
I think you answered that question. The second part of the question was, how long does that patent submission take?
The submission, as in putting it together and working with the UCI team to submit it, probably takes around 6 months to a year. It really helps if you are diligent and you give them information, but usually patent attorneys have their own time. A lot of it is because they charge you based on the time they spent, but it takes around a year to file a patent, and it takes 5 years or more to get it granted. For applying for permanent residency, the patent was helpful, but more than that, publications and the citations helped.
Is it number of publications?
The number of publications as well as the number of citations are really important. So if you can showcase that you have a paper that has been cited so certain number of times by different people that work on similar technologies, that really helps.
So something that you mentioned earlier was about startups being really fun, and that's kind of unique where you actually got to see the startup side of it. Can you share a little bit more about that experience? And it sounded like Dexcom became a really good fit for you afterwards as a more larger, more established company.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Startups are really fun. I mean, I have to also mention that the startup I worked at was from the same lab that I worked at, and it was a university-spun startup. So it may be very different if you join a startup in Silicon Valley that's not a university-spun startup. It may become much faster and much more competitive because when you are within a university setting, you're not as worried about basically paying for the bills. Not as worried, you still are, but the setting is a little different. The reason the startup period for me was super fun was you get to do so many things. From calling the vendor to putting together the sensor by your hand to writing down the IRB. So like you wear so many different hats. But when you're within industry, especially a larger company, your role is very defined. So if you want to do your role and do extra, that's great. But that extra is going to be hard to do because then you'll be overstepping other people's boundaries. So there's a lot of that bureaucracy and limits in a larger setting, and obviously lack of time.
Very true.
Thank
I
you.
have a question from Nina. What is your advice for applying to jobs in industry?
That's a really good question. Connections. I can give you all the answers that you already know, that you make your resume nice and you send it to 200 people and then you change the resume based on the job application. I mean, that works. You create a good resume that fits that particular role you want to apply to. So resume for each application should be different. And it needs to answer questions they're looking for. On top of that, you need to work on developing a certain level of connection. So if you know someone from that particular company that you want to apply to, reach out to them, ask who the hiring manager is, ask what they're looking for, share their resume with them through offline channels, LinkedIn, email, and then have them or ask them to share it with the hiring manager. This oftentimes helps tremendously because when we put a role for the XCOM, we get hundreds of applicants, and they're strong applicants. So it's very easy to just miss a good applicant. This really helps.
There's another question from Hasti. Did you want to unmute and ask for yourself?
Yeah, sure. I can do that. Hi. Yeah, my question was a little long, but I can try to summarize it. It was about my question was about you studying business and also working full time. I wonder in general, first of all, how challenging have you found that so far? I'm not sure if you're still doing it or not. And second, is that something that your company or your boss or people who you're working for full time need to approve? And is it possible that sometimes they don't allow something like that, or that's like your off time and it's like not up to them at all? Well, just curious. Want to see how likely it is to be able to do that like practically when we get a full time job. Yeah, thank you.
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking it. It definitely, I mean, I'm starting the business school right now, but I've talked to so many people that have done this, and there are not a lot of people that have done PhD and that they're doing business. But I've talked to a lot of people. It probably will take around 20 to 25 hours a week on average, which could be challenging if you have a 40-hour work. But it's not challenging when you think about the life of a PhD student, to be honest with you. So 60 hours is nothing. So as long as I maintain that mentality of my grad school, I should be fine. This is my understanding. But yeah, definitely it's going to be a challenge. It's going to impact your personal life for around 3 years. Is this something that your company and boss need to approve? I would say so, because this could potentially impact your availability. Even though this is an evening program or a weekend program. My advice is if somebody wants to do this, they should develop a really strong communication with their supervisors within the industry way beforehand. And say, this is one of my aspirations. I want to do this thing. And these are the reasons that this will help us, because I'll have an understanding of leadership. I'll have an understanding of financial aspects. I can bring in more connections from different parts of the industry. So it needs to be an argument that's convincing to get their approval. That's what I would suggest. And is it related to them? It could be. It could be, especially if you're working in advanced tech R&D that I'm working. You will basically be working with technologies that will come out in 5 to 10 years. So there are departments and teams that look into the market for those technologies because it doesn't exist yet. They go through surveys, they go through deep understandings. There are people that do venture capitalist kind of work here, or in any big company. So being able to wear different hats could be really helpful. I think I addressed the topics.
Yes, thank you. I have a follow-up question, but if there's time at the end, I will just ask. Thank
Sure.
you.
Mhm.
I think the next question I see in chat is from Ting Wei. Ting Wei, did you want to unmute and ask? If not, I can read it. How did you start the idea of making the project into an actual startup? Did you get advice from your academic advisor at that time? It sounded like it was a startup that was already going, right?
That's what I was going to say. This was a startup that was already going, and it went through different pivots. So it had a different name. We went through some funding issues. This is 2014 to 2016. And 2016, it was reformatted at a different startup. And all the credit goes to the team I started working with and Professor Botvinnik, because he is very entrepreneurial. But this is not only the case within the lab I worked on. I've had friends from UC Irvine, from different places, that really pioneered all the work. They made the connections within the university. It's a really great setting. At UC Irvine, for example, you have the innovation at UC Irvine hub, incubation center. It's a really cool building. I forgot the name. There's a lot of resources you could use. There's a lot of people that have developed startups, and there are professors that have entrepreneurial experiences. I would say if you have a good idea, reach out to them and discuss them. But I have to make this also I have to note this as well. Be very careful with sharing your idea. Because if you send an email with your idea to a professor at UC Irvine, which I love that the university will own the idea. So if you want to do it within university, I would highly suggest it because they're super supportive. But before going there, make sure you understand all the legal constraints and how you would share it, who you would share it with. I suggest reaching out to the right people within the Innovation Center. Maybe we can find some resources for you afterwards. I'll have to work with Joanne to find what that team was.
I think it was Be All Applied Innovation, the Cove area. If you're doing wet lab stuff, ULP is really great. I definitely agree. If you are using any type of UCI resources, emails included, UCI has potential to actually claim your IP if you wanted to do your own startup separate from academia and the lab space. That said, we'll add one more comment to, how do you decide if it's a good idea? Customer discovery, interviewing potential customers, seeing is there an actual market, who is actually going to buy your product, and is the pain point that you are addressing truly the pain point that people feel, or are you just building a technology because you happen to fall into that category? So ensuring that your solution, it's called a product market fit. That's the last thing I will add on that, but I totally agree in terms of making sure that getting your boxes checked legally, if depending on where you want to go with that startup.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanne. I think this was a great addition to it.
The next question from Yixin. What kind of connections is considered good in terms of connecting for applying for a job? And I think this goes back to your recommendation for networking.
I think any connection is good. I think if you go to a conference, talk to as many people as you can, see what they do, connect with them on LinkedIn, send them emails, send them follow-up emails. If you go to any location that you have a chance to connect with people, talk to them, see what they do. They could be in anywhere, any sort of industry that's related to you. It doesn't have to be, because oftentimes when we do a PhD or postdoc, we are doing something very niche. But when you go into a industrial setting, you may start from that niche thing, but then you can go to something that's completely different because the skill sets you've developed is transferable. So that connection you may be talking to is working in aerospace. I have friends like that. Could be working in a medical device company 3 years from now. So connect with them, understand what they do, tell them what you do, and maintain the connections with follow-ups, emails. If you have like an achievement, share it with them. I've always valued that.
I think those are a really good recommendation. You never know who is going to be your future employer, your future employee, or your
Yeah.
best friend. So keep that open for yourself. In terms of another question that I have lined up here, I'm curious, what does your day-to-day look like now that you've transitioned into industry? I've heard a lot of stereotypes about a lot of meetings, different types of questions that you're asking as opposed to the ones that you might have asked during your PhD. Are they similar? Are those different? What does that look like for you?
That's a really good question. The level of interaction you have with other people goes up when you work in a company in an industrial setting. So whereas PhD is mostly individual work, and then you have chances of sharing your results with your advisor and other folks every once in a while. Here within a company, you need to sit in different meetings and understand about other topics that are ongoing and other projects. So a lot of your day-to-day life would be to understand the priority of your work and understanding the other priorities and other parallel work so you don't step on the wrong foot or you get along with different people. That is a big change. In terms of day-to-day life, there is a portion of it, and it has been changing for me slowly over time. There's a portion of it that focuses on similar to PhD work, at least in this level I am at, which is understanding the experimentation and data settings. I think at this point I'm around 20 to 30% there. It has been shrinking, which is kind of unfortunate, but I think that happens. Some portion of the work, I would say around 50%, is to make sure the projects I'm leading are moving forward. And oftentimes there's 7 to 8 different people from 7 to 8 different departments that are working on it. So it's a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of checkpoints, a lot of milestones. And 20 to 30% of the work is, I would say 20% or 15% of the work is making sure everything is aligned for the long-term goals. Maybe 15%, 10, 15% is reading about what's going to be next. So that's like 10 to 50% of your time that you'd be thinking about. At least I dedicate that time. But what to do next? What we're going to develop in the next 5 years. I think that's my breakdown.
It's good to hear, especially about the future facing. I feel like we do that a lot from PhD perspective of seeing what's new, what's going on, how do I incorporate, how do I advance?
Yeah.
The next question that we had is from Naveed. Any advice for postdocs wishing to make a transition to industry, but have earned their PhDs outside of the US? And I guess maybe, Naveed, if you wanted to add some more implication to that, is it because the value of the education is lower, or what do you like? What's the barrier for you?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just asking in the perspective of the kind of value you get you having your PhD from US soil than the PhD outside of US. I mean, that's the main perspective I would like to ask for. Thank you.
Navid, if you don't mind me asking, I have it here. You have a PhD and MSc 2-year, second-year postdoc. Okay. That's a really good question. But I don't think it would be necessarily limiting. I totally understand that if you have the degree from US, and it's even easier if you are from US. I admit that. But postdoc is also a great opportunity. If you are working on a project that has industry applications, that postdoc can give you a place to use for building really valuable connections. You'll be going to conferences, you'll be going to expos, you'll be out there with that postdoc, with publications. I would say use that opportunity to connect with as many people that work on similar topics within industry and connect with them and see what they're working on and kind of understand if you really want to switch to industry, what kind of application you'll be targeting and what kind of other skill sets you would need to use. I don't think it's limiting. I have coworkers that have done PhDs in other countries, and they've done postdocs in the United States for a couple of years with really strong publications, very strong track record, and they've used that and the connections of their advisors to get into Dexcom or other countries. Other companies. It may be a little bit challenging, but I would say you can really utilize that postdoc in your benefit.
I'm curious, Evan, are you on the hiring committees? Are you working with hiring managers for Dexcom?
Depends. If you get someone in our team that goes through rounds of interviews, we interview them oftentimes. But I'm not in a hiring committee capacity.
Okay. So when you're interviewing, what are some qualities that you look for to see if they're a good candidate or not?
That's a really good question. And you need to keep in mind, I come from a PhD background. So oftentimes when I do an interview, I go through, and this is a trick I do, a lot of other people do as well. You go and find something that they have done, maybe in their PhD, maybe in their master's, maybe in their previous work, and just jump deep into asking questions and then follow-up questions up until a point that they can answer question or they can admit they don't know. I think the fact that you can go deep and have an intellectual conversation without having your guards up and being comfortable with knowing or mentioning what you know and you don't know really is helpful. And that's something I use. Other than that, you want to understand how they work within a team. So these are the two things I usually check.
That's really good to hear. And I've definitely heard and seen that as well from other colleagues who are taking sort of a deep dive into, can I just have a conversation with this person? What are sort of, how do they tick and how do they think?
Yeah.
So on my end, I don't have any additional questions that I have. Is there any more questions up in the chat?
I don't see any other questions. I think Hasti mentioned she has a follow-up question. Maybe you can address that.
Yeah, Hasti, are you still with us?
Yes. Thank you. My question kind of related to what you mentioned about your manager being on the same page as like if you're doing like for other programs or things. I think one general worry, I guess, that I have looking for jobs other than finding a job, which is my first worry. The second one is finding a good manager that is on the same page in terms of my personal growth, like just allowing me to have opportunities. And for example, if I want to go, let's say, get an MBA, they would be, not against it, at least. But I've been hearing from my friends who have recently went to, industry, that a lot of the times their managers are not really helpful in that sense. I guess there's different types of people, I guess. And I mean, I can't really speak to that specific cases. I haven't experienced that myself, but I mean, other than just talking and interviewing, because I know that like one of the goals of interview process is for the applicant also to ask questions and make sure they're on the same page. That being said, with the current situation of the market, I can try to do that to some extent, but I just wondering like if I have that ability to like choose a manager, like what qualities, what is something that I can like you would recommend that I look into so that I can have a supportive manager. I think that's really important to me. Again, I don't know how likely it is for me to have that ability to pick. Maybe I don't, especially for the first few jobs. But yeah, any insights would be very helpful. Thank you.
No, thank you for asking this question. That's a really great question. You said it correctly. The first job may be more challenging because you want to get your foot in the door. So oftentimes people don't have that much leverage to pick and choose, especially if they're on visa programs. But during the interview, there are opportunities to assess. what the deal is like. It's a little bit different if you are within industry, you already have a job, and then you're looking at your options, and if they give you a bad response, you'll be like, no, I'm kind of hesitant. But every person that interviews you will ask towards, they should. If they don't, you can tell them. They should give you around 5 minutes back over 30 minutes for you to ask questions. And one of the questions you can ask is, how do you like working within your team? They will probably say, I like it, but you can ask, if there was one thing you could change within the work dynamic you are, what would it be? And then get this perspective from different people within the team. And also, if you interview the hiring manager, ask them, what is your input on career progression and how much do you value personal growth? I mean, word it nicely. They most likely will say, we really value it. But when you get this from different perspectives, especially from people that are not directly working with a hiring manager, you get the overall understanding of how it's going to be. It's a hit or miss. Bad managers are really terrible. Good managers are perfect. A good manager would not micromanage you, especially when you come from a good background, and they will allow you to basically grow. One of the things I highly suggest is if you apply to a company that's a large company and you know someone inside that company, or you have a connection in LinkedIn that has a connection within that company, reach out to them and talk to them over the phone and get their feedback. I've done this before as well. And it doesn't have to be a direct connection. It can be a connection of a connection that would introduce you. Just reach out to them, say, hey, I'm going through interviews. I may most likely get this job within this role. I want to get your honest feedback. And they're not going to be responsible for your interview, so they can give you more honest feedback. Hopefully that helps. I know that period is very stressful.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
We have a comment from me about sort of assessing the company culture, is directly asking about how's the company culture. I've seen that sometimes fall a bit vague because folks can kind of hide behind, well, this is our mission, this is our group. So I'm just curious if there was a more specific question there. Something that I know that I've seen to be effective is to ask directly of, when someone has not been successful, when someone has made a mistake, how do the team go about dealing with that? Or how do you recover from something like that? How was the person treated? Can you give me an example of how that looked like? I don't know if you have any other questions that you like to ask, Abid.
I would just add this. Keep in mind when you're applying to a role and interviewing with me and a couple other people, there's always more applicants for that role. So we'll be interviewing 4 or 5 different people for that role. And there are other roles as well. So we'll be interviewing 20, 30 people. And if I don't like the culture of my company, which I do, but if it's a company I don't like the culture, I'm not going to go ahead and tell 30 different people that the culture is terrible, because it's going to backfire. And somebody's going to know that I'm saying this. So you need to be a little bit clever, I would say, to understand what's going on. So you probably want to address it differently. Just put them in a position to say, hypothetically, if you wanted to change, or if you become a manager yourself, what would you do differently? Put them in a position to give you feedback that could be helpful. Yeah, that's my input here.
That's actually a really good hypothetical question to give.
Yeah.
The next question from Nagar: are internships during PhD helpful in getting a job in the future? If yes, what kind of companies should we choose to intern for? Do you, as a person from the hiring side, do you see those as valuable for a PhD, or is
Yeah,
PhD
they're
sufficient?
definitely valuable. This is a really great question. When I was doing my PhD, I didn't do internship. And when you come as an international student, you really don't have that much of leverage. And saying, hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 months. Or if you're like a PhD student, sometimes you need to have really clear understanding of what it takes for you to be gone for a couple months during summer somewhere else. But they're definitely very helpful. You build really good connections. if you do a really good job, you have a very good chance of getting into that company. So when it comes to the application times, you can focus on that company and multiple other companies. And then if you have multiple different offers, you can leverage them to get like, it's not just about pay, to be able to negotiate what you want. So definitely, if you have an opportunity, depending on your PhD project, to do internship, do it. But keep in mind, doing internship oftentimes may result in a PhD that may last longer. So it's very different from case to case. But these are the factors you want to think about.
Really good to hear. Another question from Mina. Do most companies have visa support for international applicants? I don't know if you've been able to see sort of a broader perspective in the time that you were applying.
Yeah, some companies have this. Larger companies have this. I would say companies do have visa support for international applicants. They get H-1B, which is a work visa for you. And then if you're doing a good job, you can perhaps apply for a green card through the company as well. That's a very good route for getting permanent residency. I would suggest, however, to really utilize that OPT period, because when you're in STEM and you get your PhD, you can get an OPT extension up to 3 years. That's the easiest path forward until you find certain details. But to answer your question, yes.
Excellent. Alrighty. I don't see any other questions in chat as we're rounding out the last 10 minutes. If there are no more questions, we can wrap up here and let folks ask individual ones when we're off sort of the recording. But please, everyone, go ahead and give a thank you to our speaker today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your workday to be able to speak with us.